No one has to die for this kind of love. Why Heated Rivalry Going Global Changes Everything by Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell. There is a particular kind of quiet violence that queer audiences have learned to accept in popular culture. For decades, stories about male queer desire have arrived with an unspoken price tag. Longing must be punished, intimacy fleeting, and love, if it exists at all, must be paid for in suffering. Sometimes that suffering looks like exile, sometimes like madness, sometimes like a lonely fade into respectability. Very often, though, it looks like death. That is why the global, unapologetic enthusiasm surrounding Heated Rivalry, the love story of star hockey players Shane Hollander, played by Hudson Williams, and Ilya Rozanov, played by Connor Story, and their secret years-long enemies-to-lovers romance off the ice, is just extremely radical. Because here is the most quietly revolutionary thing about Heated Rivalry. No one has to die for that love story to be true. Male queer desire has always existed in popular media, but it has rarely been allowed to breathe. Early cinematic and literary representations coded queerness as menace, comedy, or tragedy. The Hays Code era in Hollywood didn't simply prohibit explicit homosexuality, it transformed it into subtext, shadow, and implication. Desire had to be legible only to those who already knew how to look for it, and even then, it had to be punished by the end. This pattern endured long after censorship finally ended. Films and novels in the late 20th century allowed queer men to exist more openly, but not more freely. Their stories were framed as important, serious, or brave, which often translated to heavy, tragic, and instructional for straight audiences. The media ecosphere I came of age in was the tearjerker movie of the week that was about the family trauma dealing with either the son coming out or dying of AIDS. Subtext being, we love you anyway. There was that and the horrendous Boys in the Band, which took weaponized camp to the point of psychological scarring for my little adolescent brain as I watched it on late-night oldies programming on TV. I did love Brideshead Revisited, though. Those boys romping around that house and estate was pretty magical. And it definitely inspired me. If I ever do get married, it would be nice to do it in a perfectly tailored tux overlooking the Grand Canal in Venice with my betrothed. Lord Sebastian Flight, though, he ended up dissolute, drug addicted, and then, you guessed it, dead. The cultural logic was clear through these representations. Male queer love could be shown, kinda, but only as a warning. It could be moving, but not sustainable. It could be erotic, but only briefly, before those consequences arrived. This is the lineage that culminates most famously in Brokeback Mountain, a really beautiful, tender, and ultimately devastating film that became shorthand for queer tragedy itself. Ennis and Jack's love is real, but the world cannot contain it. One man survives, hollowed out. The other does not survive at all. He is beaten to death by the side of the road. The message, however unintentional, was absorbed clearly. Truth costs lives. For many queer viewers, Brokeback Mountain was both a breakthrough and an assault. It proved that male queer desire could be treated with seriousness and cinematic care, but only if it remained doom. There is a cruel paradox at the heart of how queer stories have been legitimized. To be taken seriously, they must be hurt. The characters must suffer. Think of movies like Boys Don't Cry. All queer characters were going to feel it at some point. Joy is considered frivolous. Pleasure is suspect. Happy endings are naive, dishonest, or worse, impossible. This is especially true for stories involving masculinity, sports, or more culturally straight domains. When queer desire enters these spaces, it is often framed as transgressive, dangerous, or unsustainable. The men may want each other, but they cannot have lives together. The world will just not allow it. What Heated Rivalry does differently is deceptively simple. It just refuses that premise. Shane and Ilya are not tragic figures wandering toward inevitable loss. They are not metaphors for repression. They are not teaching moments. They are two men who want each other fiercely, repeatedly, and over time, as the story treats that wanting both erotic and ordinary. This is not a love story that asks anyone's permission to exist. Also, one of the most groundbreaking aspects of heated rivalry is how explicit it is, not just sexually, although I love that, but emotionally. Queer desire here is not implied or deferred, it is named and acted on. It is messy, competitive, tender, selfish, generous, and very human, very real. Crucially, the story does not ask the audience to translate longing through glances or metaphors. The engagement is literal. Bodies meet, words are spoken, then these boys really go at it. Eventually, feelings are admitted, even when they are inconvenient. This matters because so much male queer media has relied on distance to create safety for mainstream consumption. The farther apart the men are, emotionally, geographically, temporally, the easier it is for non-queer audiences to tolerate the story. Heated rivalry collapses that distance. It insists that the intimacy itself is the point. And yet, it is not fantasy in the sense critics often mean. The characters live in a recognizable world of contracts, careers, media scrutiny, and internalized fear. What makes the story radical is not that problems disappear, but they are survivable. No one is sacrificed to make the narrative feel real. The fact that heated rivalry has become a globally trending phenomenon, discussed across platforms, fandoms, and borders, is not incidental. It reflects a generational shift in how audiences engage with queer narratives. Younger viewers and readers are not content with meager scraps of representation. They do not want to decode longing from silence or accept misery as proof of depth. They want stories that reflect the fullness of queer experience: desire, ambition, jealousy, joy, sex, love, and yes, even happiness. What is striking is how broad the appeal has become. This is not a niche apologetic success. It is mainstream interest in a story that does not dilute its queerness to be palatable. Instead of explaining itself, it assumes its own legitimacy, and the audience follows along. That shift signals something important. Queer love and joy is no longer seen as a lie. Another reason heated rivalry feels so destabilizing, in the best way, is how it treats masculinity. Shane and Ilya are not punished for being masculine, even while they are loving men. They exist as athletes, competitors, rivals, and lovers, without the story demanding that one identity cancel out the other. Although the character I thought was the hottest was probably the artsy barista, I did not mind the characterizations. Historically, male queer desire in masculine spaces has been framed as either secretive or destructive. Sports narratives in particular have relied on the idea that queerness is incompatible with excellence, leadership, or toughness. When queer athletes appear, they are often isolated, symbolic figures. Heated rivalry rejects that isolation. Desire does not diminish the character's power, it sharpens it. Love is a force they must learn to integrate into their lives. This reframing is not just progressive, it is truthful. Queer men have always existed in these spaces. The difference now is that the story does not treat the fact as a problem to be solved. Perhaps the most emotionally resonant difference between heated rivalry and earlier landmarks like Brokeback Mountain is its refusal to turn queer men into martyrs. There is no requirement that suffering authenticate the love story, no symbolic death to reassure the audience that the world's cruelty has been properly acknowledged. Instead, the narrative trusts that survival can be meaningful. This does not erase pain, fear, or conflict, but it does reject inevitability. The characters are allowed to imagine futures together, and the story treats that imagining as credible. Would I like the characters to have come out at the end? Of course. And I liked that the mother was already planning it out. Maybe that will be the focus of Heated Rivalry 2. In conclusion, here is why I think this moment matters. It would be easy to dismiss the success of Heated Rivalry as a fluke of fandom or timing, but doing so would miss the deeper cultural shift it represents. We are witnessing a moment where queer stories are no longer required to justify their existence through tragedy, where male queer desire and sexuality can be explicit, central, and joyous, and still resonate globally, where love between men does not have to be framed as exceptional, doomed, or instructional to matter. This is not just progress. It is a redefinition of narrative truth. Because the truth is not that queer love ends in death. The truth is that queer people have always lived, loved, fought, reconciled, and built our lives together. often in spite of the stories told about us. Heated rivalry does not invent a new reality. It finally reflects our reality. And perhaps that is why it feels so electric, because it dares to tell the truth without apology. No one has to die for this love. And the world, it turns out, is apparently more than ready to watch it live. Thanks for listening. This is Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell, and I am a scholar who focuses on fashion and queer history, and my new book, Canadian Fashion Economies, is out from Bloomsbury.